Okay, okay. Welcome to our third episode, if you will, of This Is Your Life. And today we are honored to hear from Jon Whited. So Jon, where did this all begin? What year were you born? Where were you born?
I was born in 1937 in San Diego. I was the fourth child, three of us living. I was the youngest, and I had a lot of guidance from my older sister who kind of raised me.
What was your childhood like, other than your sister raising you? That's interesting.
Well, I remember some of the things, like I remember Pearl Harbor. The adults had a birthday party for me, so they were all having fun out in the kitchen, dining room, and the radio was on for music, and it was interrupted. And I remember it said they interrupted this program to bring you an important message: Pearl Harbor's been bombed.
That must have been quite. You were how old then?
I was 4.
Wow.
So
Wow.
my dad went overseas. He was a civilian, and he went with the troops, throughout the Pacific. And he worked on aircraft. He was an aircraft mechanic, a very good one. And when they needed something, he would build it for them in the field. Or if they needed repairs, he'd go take care of it. But when they really needed something, he was the guy that would design it in the field, and if they liked it, then he'd draw up the plans and send it back and then put it into production. And he went from New Zealand to Australia, to the Solomons and on up, and spent a lot of time in New Guinea, and on up towards the Philippines. So it's really...
Okay.
It was hard to be without a father. And so my mother just called her sister and said, "Hey, do you want the kids?" So we were shipped up to Oregon, and we took a Greyhound bus, the 3 of us kids, up to Oregon, and I lived with my aunt and uncle, and it was a wonderful time. I got to be on a farm and take care of cows at 5 o'clock in the morning. Go out, and even as a kid, my uncle just was ridiculous. He let me do things that we wouldn't let our kids do anymore. We really wouldn't. I was driving tractors when I was 6 years old. I was driving a truck, and I could hardly reach the pedals, but he'd give me jobs that I could do. But it was very rewarding, and it taught me that I could do a lot of things that I didn't know I could do. So when I got back to, my dad came back, and I was always kind of independent. So that was my childhood. I was the last of the kids. There was 4 years between my brother and myself, 6 years between my sister and myself. My sister really kind of took me under her wing, and she was the person that basically raised me.
How about your education?
Well, let's see. High school, it was down in San Diego, and then my dad was transferred to Edwards Air Force Base. At that, I was in Lancaster in the last 2 years, and went into the Air Force after that. And my real education started when I went in the Air Force. So I went in out of high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, except for I wanted to be a pilot. Had to be a pilot. And so before I joined up, I went down and took the test, and I passed the test, okay? Being rather naive and a kid of 18, what do you know? So you get there, and I wanted to make absolutely sure, so I took it a second time before I went down. Passed the test. I thought, okay. So I joined the Air Force. And I said, okay, I'm ready to go into cadets. And they said, well, you can't, you're not 19. I said, well, what do I do? He said, you can pull KP or you can go to school. I said, well, I don't want to pull KP, okay? So they sent me to school. It was a 57 weeks long. And it was 8 hours a day, 5 days a week in electronics and radar and missile guidance. And they taught me a lot. I didn't have any confidence. I hadn't developed any confidence in high school. And suddenly here I was placed into a position of I had to take care of myself and do well. And they placed an incentive in there for me. Said, you can call your own base. You can go to pick your own base where you're going to be stationed if you are the class leader. So I worked really hard and I graduated #1 in my class. Well, that was pretty good. Well, I went over to get it into cadets. I was halfway through school in the meantime, and they said, oh, you're in a critical field now. We can't let you get out of this. I said, okay, well, this went on for 2.5 years, okay? And I finally got to the point where I wanted to read what I was going to sign. I wanted to make sure. So a big lesson that they taught me. I took the test again because it was outdated. I passed it. And they had another 6-month delay added onto that and had to take it again, passed it. And they handed me orders and I was going to flight school. So I thought, this is pretty cool. Dean can relate to this because he came up through the ranks and went into being an officer. And anyway, then I read the bottom of it and I'm going, what's this other thing here? You're extending me for how long? Now, I'd been in 2.5 years. Okay, guess what? Another 5.5 years on top of that. And I said, wait a second. So I turned it down. And I stayed in electronics. And then when I got out of the Air Force, I went to college and worked my way through. And I worked my way through by doing what I was taught in the Air Force. I worked on guidance systems for ICBMs. I worked on radar and missile guidance when I was in the Air Force.
For those who don't know what ICBM is, enlighten us.
Intercontinental ballistic missile. So I would tailor the guidance package. So you wanted to hit something, I'd go ahead and tailor it and make sure it'd work. And had these gigantic computers that we'd check it out on. Well, I was trained in computers while I was in the Air Force. So my training was a lot of practical experience. And what was really valuable and the most important thing in my life, I think, as far as education, I learned that you can be really smart and you can have really good classes, but if you can't apply it to the needs, it doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And so what I wanted to do was be able to apply what I learned and what I love to do in operations. So if it was going to be used, I wanted it to be used in the field with the military so they didn't have trouble with it. I didn't even want somebody getting hurt because I didn't do a job right. So I got into systems and I was trained by the Air Force before I got out and into college to be in systems engineering. And that's where my education really started.
And say a couple of things about your dad. I wrote down experimental aircraft, weapons, and I know you have a picture of him over on the table.
My dad, coming up through a young adult through the Depression, kind of everybody knows the stories from our parents, right? Okay, so he was unique, and he was a very, very smart man, and he basically gave me value. He wouldn't go out of his way to teach me things in particular, but he taught me value. He taught me basically the things you want in your life for moral guidance. So he was pretty cool. He worked on aircraft. He went through the war, got out. He was then put into experimental at Convair at the time, General Dynamics later. So he worked on the experimental aircraft. Well, I fell in love with that because I already liked aircraft and I'd already been in the Air Force. And so while he was out at Edwards Air Force Base, I was in high school and getting ready to graduate. And he was the crew chief on the F-106 test program. And the F-106 was an interceptor. It used to go up and protect us, like Dean said, no bomber got through because, it did a good job protecting us. Well, the F-106 was the Cadillac of all the interceptors. And he was the crew chief on the aircraft that set the world speed record in 1958. Still stands. Go ahead. I'm watching Suzanne because she's going to give me cut off.
No, she's not.
Usually turn it off.
We've all been there. So, okay, You spent some time in Okinawa.
Yes, when I was in the Air Force, one of the things I did was I really wanted to find out what would happen. When I graduated from electronics, I went into test squadron. I wanted to be in testing. My dad was out at Edwards at a test base, and I thought, oh, this is what I want to do. And they didn't have any openings, so they said, well, we have this opening in Florida, in Panama City. And I was thinking, Panama City, where's that? Well, Tyndall Air Force Base did the testing for the Air Force and all their airborne weapons. And I was assigned to the squadron that did the testing for all the airborne weapons. It was good duty, but from there, I wanted to see how do you apply it, because I couldn't believe we were going to go up and shoot rockets at, like they did in World War II. And some of the aircraft we tested had antennas on them that were right straight out of World War II. And I'm going, you gotta be kidding me. Who's going to be nutty enough? Now I was starting to respect my decision not to go into pilot training, because who's going to fly one of these things with this equipment that may not work? And that really, that set the stage for me. It really did. And I think I learned a lot from that. I went to Okinawa and was assigned to a squadron. Should have been a clue. Most squadrons have 12 aircraft. We had 32. And we were a strike team. So anything that came up anywhere in the Pacific Rim, we could be called up, and we had a 2-minute alert, a 15-minute alert, and a 2-hour alert. So if you were on alert and things happened fast, you were out, and our job was to go ahead and shoot down whatever was out there. And it was during peacetime, right? But it wasn't. It was a pretty hot war. We covered, our area of operation was from the Philippines, North Vietnam, China, northern Japan, southern Russia, eastern Russia, Vladivostok, and those were the areas that we'd go into all the time. It was pretty good, though. They were pretty considerate. We'd only go in for 2 weeks at a time, then to rotate another team in. So we'd go in with 6 aircraft at one time, and then we'd just be up there and do the defense. That was Okinawa.
What do you know about spy satellites?
One of the things I did was, after I graduated, I went to the Cape, and I was working on the Saturn program. And this guy walked up to me, and I didn't know who he was. And I had started focusing on systems engineering and systems testing. And so I really enjoyed the test programs. He walked up to me and he said, hey, I'd like to talk to you. I thought, who are you? And so, I'm Gail Mathis. Okay, well, where are you from? And he's Sunnyvale. I said, where's Sunnyvale? Okay. Next thing I knew, I was hired to leave the Cape, and I was responsible for converting all the hardware testing procedures that we used in the military to software. I didn't even know what software was. They had to teach me while I went through this. And that software that I worked on was for spy satellites. And I worked a ton of spy satellites. I got a picture of one of them over there. It was battlefield surveillance. It was strategic intelligence. It was deep space intelligence. You name it, I got my hand into it, and it had a lot to do with that whole area.
You mentioned one time you were flying a plane, and there was a passenger that belonged to a 3-letter organization in the United States. Tell us about that experience.
Part of what we did in the spy programs that we had, all the different types of satellites, since I liked systems engineering so much, and I developed the systems test procedures for a lot of the work, I crossed over a lot of different programs. And to think of this and to understand it, can you think of a checkerboard and all the little checkers on it? You got the squares, okay. Then you divide it into 4. So you got 4 subsystems, but you have all these different programs you have that are written. And so then you put them together, then you have the whole thing. My job was the whole thing, okay? Because of that, and working so many different programs, I became very watched after. And so as a result, when I would travel, unknown to me and to any of my crew, people would go around us and they would protect us. We always had protection. I mean, literally, when I'd get off the plane in Los Angeles, as an example, there'd be a guy walk up to me and hand them keys. And he said, the green Oldsmobile is yours. And the first time it happened, I said, where do you want me to leave it? Anywhere you want. Now, have you ever left a car parked at LAX? You know, it takes about 15 seconds for the wreckers to be there and tow it away. Never got touched. And the police would never go near it. That car was mine, and it didn't mess with it. So we had protection. Got on one flight, and we were coming back. It was a long flight. There were 8 of us carrying stuff. There was software programs. And we were briefed on what to look for people that were suspicious and be aware. And we're looking at this one guy walking up the aisle, and we're all going like, this is not good. And so I'm taking my glasses off and putting them in my pocket, and we're getting ready for a fight. We were in the back of the aircraft. And these 2 guys jumped up from this guy, just pounced on him, just boom, put handcuffs on him, and walked on by and said, "You're okay? You guys are okay?" And I'm going, "Okay." That was not unusual. I could fly privately. That was my hobby. That's how I kept sane. I could fly, and if I wanted to go down to Los Angeles with classified information, they would pick me up. The FBI would pick me up. They'd take me to the plane. 2 guys would get in the back seat with their guns, and me flying it, and then fly down to Los Angeles. I'd land in Santa Monica, and then there'd be another team of FBI guys and give me a car, and then they'd follow me, and I could do whatever I wanted, and I had protection the whole time.
So FBI and CIA, it's just part of your daily day back then.
Yeah,
crazy stuff.
Very much so. We were followed, we were photographed, our phones were tapped. We were young enough that we didn't think that we were really in danger. And it got to us, though. And one of my men was injured badly. He was driving. We worked in one computer center, and our offices were across the freeway. So we'd drive across. Denny was driving across and got hit. He was T-boned. And a second car came up, and they opened the door, grabbed his briefcase, and ran and took it. So.
What a life. What a life. So it changed. You've had a few other careers. What came next?
Well, of course, I was married, family, little boy and a little girl. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with a terminal illness and given 18 months. They had a business, and they asked me if I would take over the business for them during this period of time. And I thought, I'm a little tired of this. You know, it gets to be a strain after a while. You kid yourself and say, no, it's not, but it is. Anyway, so, okay, I'm ready. I didn't even think they'd let me out, but they did. And I took over their real estate business, and I thought 18 months, but turned into 10 years. She made it 10 years before she went and sold it at that point. It just, I forget the question now.
Other careers you've had.
Well, basically, so after the spy business, I did the real estate, and then from there, I was kind of looking afterwards, and I went to work for St. Jude Medical. One of the things that really was pronounced in my career was how procedure was so important in these processes. You know, you get a computer program in your phone, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Mine turns off my hearing aids every time I turn my phone off. And, you know, you can't have that. These things, you just can't do that. People's lives depend on what you do. So you're used to doing things right? Well, one of the things I found was that in the medical industry, they had to do the same thing that we had done when we were in, basically, you know, in aerospace, let's just say. I got a job at St. Jude Medical, and being the systems type, they said, we really need to build our company up. And I said, okay, what do you need? And they said, we need engineers. Can you go out and find us engineers? Okay, yeah. So I was, for 10 years, I put together the engineering teams for St. Jude Medical for pacemakers and ICDs and heart valves and leads.
And ICDs are?
Implantable cardiac defibrillator. And those are those things where you can get a shock if your heart isn't behaving properly and it brings you back. Anyway, so I put these teams together, and I had a group. There were actually 4 of us that did the hiring, but in 10 years, I hired 800 engineers. Sold the company to Abbott. So Abbott is the largest manufacturer of medical devices in the world. And that's who we were trying to be bought by. We wanted the biggest one to buy us, and that's what happened.
Tell us about this lady sitting over there. Do you know her?
Yeah, the one signaling time. Met Suzanne. I had gone through a really ugly divorce. I was still kind of going through it. And Suzanne was going through her husband's death, brain cancer. Didn't know each other. Went to the same church, didn't know each other. I sang in the choir. Her husband sang in the choir before he passed. I didn't know him. I didn't know Suzanne. So after Bill passed, her husband, some of our friends that knew both of us kept saying, you got to go, go meet Suzanne. And I'm going, I'm not, after a divorce, I am absolutely against any female in the world. Last thing I'd teach Bible studies. I'd make sure the guys knew how to avoid women, period. I wasn't ready. And Suzanne wasn't ready. It had only been a couple years. Yeah.
Here we are. I wrote down car wash when you were telling me this story.
That's all right.
Where does the car wash come in?
The car lot. Oh, well, that was the beginning of our dating. I told the guys in my Bible study, there's no way that I would ever. And they were saying, you'll meet somebody. No way. I'm an avid woman hater, period. That's it. And so as we got to know each other through friends, I'm thinking, what am I doing? And so I invited Suzanne up to, we're going to go and have a drink at this one nice little bar, and they had some hors d'oeuvres. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing? I shouldn't be doing this, but as I said, I don't want to do anything that's like a formal date. I want something that's really casual. Okay, so I decided I would be brave, and I said, Suzanne, you want to go to the car wash with me?
How romantic.
I was so nervous that I was doing this, I couldn't believe it. And we went to the car wash, and we were talking. It was kind of fun. And I was so nervous, I backed into the car and back of me.
Jon, you've had quite a career, very different careers, however, one that really suited what you've learned. Which ones were your favorite? Which ones were you most proud of the work you did?
Well, I really have 2 favorites. The work I did at St. Jude and putting the teams together, the pacemakers and ICDs. I brought some samples for you so you can look at them over on the table.
If you need a new pacemaker, he's got one over here for you. So.
And that work was really rewarding. We did some cutting edge work. One of the jobs I had was to develop the biomedical engineering programs in universities and go out and find good universities and students. And I found a really good source at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. I went all over the country, MIT, Georgia Tech, every place. And I'd meet with professors in engineering and try and get them to bring in new procedures and at least process into the engineering programs that would emphasize the cardiac issues that are associated with biomedical engineering. So I spent a lot of time on that when I was at St. Jude. And I got to the point where I was developing programs with them, and I would look at everything from a 3-year perspective. It took about 5 years to bring an engineer out of a university and train them and then get them involved and develop a product. So we didn't see any product out of that engineer for about 5 years. So what I did is I brought our needs into the universities, and I would train the students while they're still there and give them junior projects and senior projects. But I worked an intellectual property agreement with the universities, and that's not easy. That's probably the most difficult thing. That was so rewarding to work with all those students and to see that develop, because I started with the Dean of Engineering at Cal Poly, the biomedical engineering program there. That was neat.
Did any of these medical devices that you worked with on created affect anyone close to you that you might know well?
Well, Suzanne's had 2 of them. Actually, the devices I helped to work on. And she started with the pacemaker. And just recently, she's gotten an ICD, with implantable cardiac defibrillator. Now, if you haven't heard about those, it's like having a medical team walk around with you the whole time. She can be walking around, and something goes funny with her heart, and it goes to her phone, calls a doctor. Doctor looks at it because he's getting a view of her heart right then and there, real time. And if it's bad, he says, "Oh, go to the emergency room." So it's really it's a lifesaver.
And I can't imagine how rewarding that is for you. Are you ready for some questions?
Sure.
There might be questions. Anybody? Mary? Wait.
I was really curious about these terrible people trying to hurt you guys. What countries were they coming from? Were they within the country, or were they other countries?
Great question. No, they're from the United States. They were students from the Democratic Society. Almost all of them came from the colleges.
No. I'm talking about when you were in the...
When they were trying to hurt us?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, mostly they were students from colleges.
They were from here.
You've seen the students now where they go out and they disrupt things?
Yeah.
It's no different.
So
When
they
I
were
would
actually
drive...
on the plane trying to get at you.
Well, that guy, I don't know. I didn't actually get to talk to him. I'm glad to. No, I would leave the parking lot at work, and I'd be photographed and followed.
By students?
By students, yeah. SDS, Students for a Democratic Society.
I don't understand. I guess I'm...
Well,
Yeah. No.
Sometimes I talk to my granddaughter and say, "What are you taking?" She says, "Oh, I'm taking this class." And I said, that's communism. And she's, "Yeah, they teach that now. That's why you take it. So I can get an A and I need the grade point, so I'm going ahead and doing it." But they teach that in the colleges now.
Yeah. Brainwashing. Okay.
Suzanne's going, don't.
Wow. Other questions?
Not all colleges, Dean, thank you.
John, I think I missed something. You were in the Air Force and you wanted to learn to fly, and that didn't happen. But then all of a sudden, after the Air Force, you were flying. Did I get that right? I don't understand how you became a pilot.
I became a flyer in the Air Force because I wanted to fly. So I took lessons when I was in the Air Force. And it was kind of neat. When we had when I was in the test squadron, we had all the latest equipment. And so we had simulators. And I was allowed to go up and fly aircraft simulators. So I have jet time and a lot of interesting things, but I just did it because I had a pilot's license. And being in a test squadron, it wasn't so formal in many respects. So they would let me go on some of the flights, and I got to do the radar flights. Most fun flight was I went out and we were recording all the missile information electronically. And our tow target plane that we were supposed to go up and practice on aborted for an engine problem. So here we are flying and done a ton of work on this plane. I'd put 6 missiles on it with 6 different recorders and took out the engines, the motors for the rockets. And I said, "I'd like to really finish this someplace. I can find something. Let me go get a buoy." This is down in Florida. So we went out over the Gulf of Mexico and I picked up the target, 185 miles. And so I let down and go around and come around. The pilot says, you better break off before you get a fire signal. Well, when we get a fire signal, the doors on the bottom of the aircraft open up, kind of like a bomber, except for this is a fighter. And 6 missiles are down on rails. They just pop right down and out, sticking out. And I looked up out of the radar, and I was right in front of approaching a Navy destroyer. And the pilot didn't tell me. The reason I wanted to abort this thing before I fired was because it was a Navy destroyer. I pulled up and I had to pull up to go over the top of the destroyer.
Questions?
Okay.
I think the fact that,
Wait.
how did you finally get your pilot's license?
Oh, I just took lessons and I flew out.
No, how did you pay for it? Why did you do it this way? It's the story you've always told me.
I was nuts about flying. I loved flying. And I took lessons while I was in the Air Force, and I flew with an Air Force Aero Club. Dean knows what those were. I paid $2.50 an hour for an aircraft at that time, so I built up time.
But didn't the government give you money for school?
Yes, after I graduated, I applied for the GI Bill, and they denied me. They said, well, you were never in combat. And I said, are you kidding me? And at any rate, so I worked my way through college completely, never a penny. 4.5 months after I graduated, the VA caught a hold of me and said, you were in combat, you should have had VA benefits. And I used those benefits to take advanced training, and that's where I got my multi-engine, I got my instructor certificates. I'm licensed as a multi-engine instrument instructor, and that's how I kept sane, because when I had to deal with all these issues in the professional life, you can't fly an airplane and try and teach somebody how to do that without really concentrating on what you're doing, and it kept me sane.
Any other questions?
There's another thing. You asked about the most favorite thing.
Yes.
And later in life, after retirement, I think what we've really come to do, and I think what we feel good about, is working in our church.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John, for pouring out all these stories. And you're welcome now to have a little chit chat, have some cookies and a little drink. But thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.